Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Sarah Boyce. I'm the Director of Research and Education at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. Before we get started with tonight's Science Pub, just a few logistics. This is truly a webinar, so we can't hear or see any participants. So throughout the talk tonight, if you have any questions or issues with the setup or anything, please feel free to use the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout tonight. If you have questions, you can type them in as you think about them, but we're going to be answering all the questions at the end of tonight, but I will be monitoring those as well to keep track. And before we get started, I just want to tell everyone who hasn't potentially been on one of our Science Pub before, this is the 7th year of Science Pub. I can't even believe that we've had 7 years of Science Pub. It's been very exciting. It's our informal science outreach where we are able to connect people with science and natural history talks from Nantucket and around the country, really, and in some cases around the globe. And it's been really fun. And for those attending tonight who've registered for this evening, we're going to be sending out a survey sometime in the next month to everyone who's attended a Science Pub, because we want to hear more about topics that people are interested in, speakers they might have suggestions for, and any other suggestions about maybe you hate the Zoom and you want it to go back to in person, or maybe you really love aspects of the Zoom. So we're going to have a lot of questions so that we want your input for how to make Science Pub in 2021-22 best for our audiences. So I kind of keep an eye out for that. And with that, I know it's a beautiful day out, and that just reminds me to remind everyone that at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, we are open year-round, sun up to sundown, so our trails are available to everyone. We have a new story walk on the trail that just came up on Friday for the young ones, and yeah, we hope people can come out and enjoy some nature. We do have, if you go to LLNF.org, we have events such as our weekly bird walks on Wednesday mornings, biodiversity walks with me on Friday mornings, and some other things that will be coming up throughout the season. So that's just my shameless promotion for everything else. But put that aside in your mind for right now, because tonight we have Thaïs Fournier, who I'm very excited to have join us tonight. Thaïs is the Natural Resource Department's Town of Nantucket Water Resource Specialist, and we're going to be talking about tiny toxins. And I'm very excited to have you here, Thaïs, so thanks for joining us.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen and just make sure everything is good. Can you hear and see me okay?
Everything's great. Okay, I'm going to mute myself and I will stop my video, but I am still here. If anyone needs anything, go ahead and put it in the chat. So thanks, Thaïs.
Welcome. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in on this beautiful day. If you notice that I will be turning this way and back to the screen, I actually do have 2 screens available for notes. So if you're wondering why the odd face direction, that's why. But as Sarah introduced, I am Thaïs. I started working with the Natural Resources Department in 2019, so a fairly new addition. And a bit about my background is I was originally working at the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. And there I was focusing more on policy work, on the effects of biosolids and the potential impacts it has on environmental health and human health as well. But most of my background is marine ecology, and I've worked in several National Estuarine Research Reserves, that's a mouthful, where I did monitor water quality. And so I have a pretty diverse background, but yeah, coming here to Nantucket and focusing on the water quality of the island. So this talk this evening is going to go a little bit about harmful algal blooms, or Cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. It's lots of different names, and the potential effects it has, and just words of caution and what to look out for. So I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, we'll continue. Oh, there we go. All right. So harmful algal blooms. The term algae is like a pretty broad term. And it's used to describe a collection of diverse aquatic organisms that in general have the ability to produce their own food, so photosynthesis. There are exceptions. The algae has very simple vegetative and reproductive structures that lack the complex issues found in higher found in higher plants. They are a beneficial part of the environment. I think they sometimes have a negative connotation because they are capable of being harmful, but it is normal to have algae producing in marine environments. However, in certain environmental conditions, which I'll discuss later on in the presentation, they can thrive and cause very unsightly looking blooms. And some of these blooms do have impact to produce toxins. So these harmful algal blooms, or HABs, they occur in freshwater, marine water, and brackish water. And they're found all across the world. So they are a big part of the environment. So specifically, I'm going to focus on cyanobacteria. This is often referred to as blue-green algae. A lot of people use the term Cyanohabs to be specific about the harmful algal blooms. So there's a lot of different terms out there. So if you hear me use multiple ones, you know what I'm referring to. So like I said, they are found all over the world. They can produce toxins that has the potential to harm human health as well as aquatic organisms, our economy, drinking water, property values, recreational activities. So it does have a large impact, and there is a lot of research going on about cyanobacteria because it does have such an impact on many different facets. So cyanobacteria are a single-celled microscopic bacteria. They are found in marine, fresh, and brackish water. So structurally, they are like a bacteria, but they're functioning like an algae. And so that's why it's cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. So it's a little bit confusing. Some good things about this, though, it was our first photosynthetic organism. It helped establish our atmosphere 3.5 billion years ago. So it's without it, we would not be here today. And it also provides an essential ecosystem. It's the base of the food chain. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have our ecosystem. So it's quite important to have phytoplankton. It just becomes an issue when they start to overproduce. So this is going in a little bit of the biology behind that, and I'll talk about this throughout the presentation, but want to keep it broad depending on the audience. And myself, I'm not a specialist in phytoplankton. It is a big part of my job, but there's plenty of people that spend their lives focusing on these very tiny organisms and can speak for hours on this. So like I said, cyanobacteria are sometimes considered algae, but they're like bacteria, and they derive their energy from photosynthesis. And so we have close to 100 genera and 2,500 species of cyanobacteria. So that's quite a bit. There's all different types. This is the photos on the screen are under the microscope, and even this, with me looking at this day to day, there are still some that are really difficult to identify. And it's definitely a skill to have because you want to make sure you're identifying the right species as you want to focus on the ones that are producing the toxins. So it's important to know what you're looking at. So these are just some photos. The blue-green algae, which is commonly referred to, is misleading as you can see below. That's a cyanobacteria bloom that's in salt water, but that's sometimes referred to as red tide. So although it's referred to as blue-green algae, they produce all different colors. We have rust tide, red tide, you can see brown, green, and sometimes there is no indication. The water may look clear, and I'll discuss that as we go on, but it can sometimes be misleading, this term, because you don't know what you're looking for. And you see these pictures such as here, it's really, there's no telling that obviously a bloom is occurring, but sometimes, you could not see anything. So blooms are caused by dinoflagellates and diatoms. There are two different types of phytoplankton, and they are found in saltwater or brackish water. Diatoms are single-celled. They also, this is I like diatoms for this reason. They are the only organism on the planet with cell walls composed of opaline silica. So if you like opals, like I do, it's a little fun fact. However, in high amounts of this, diatoms do put off domoic acid. And I say this with hesitancy because I don't want people to get overly alarmed because we don't have really high levels of this. And again, this is a high dose exposure. If you are around a massive bloom and over time, it's a cause of amnesic shellfish poisoning, which is a fatal condition, and it's characterized by seizures and loss, short-term memory loss. So it's a serious toxin. However, I do say that with hesitancy, as I don't want to alarm individuals, because again, I have not seen extreme amounts of levels on the island, and our shellfish has not experienced these blooms. And we also have the Division of Marine Fisheries that comes out in addition, that is testing the water, as well as myself and other people on the island. So rest assured that we are taking precautions to be safe. Some other toxins that cyanobacteria produce are saxitoxins, microsystems, and nodularians. And again, saxitoxin is a pretty common one that is a neurotoxin, and it's best known as its paralytic shellfish toxin. So when you're consuming shellfish that have ingested this, that's why humans have that issue. Or if you're swimming in the water and you ingest it, then you can have potential for this poisoning. Microsystems are a big common one that you typically see. That this photo here, that's green, that's typically what microcystin will look like, microcystis, excuse me, but it's producing the toxin microcystin. And that is hepatotoxic, so it's related to the liver. So that is a big one as well. It can cause liver damage. And there are several of them that can cause, it's a neurotoxin, so affects your nervous system, and those are pretty serious. So although I want people to feel comfortable and safe on Nantucket and around the water, I just have to explain that there is potential for serious illness. Although when I look at our data and my experience, we've had very, very low negligible levels of these toxins. So, or toxin producing species. So that is, makes me feel good, or at least better. So what is the cause of these cyanohabs? So I'll touch on environmental factors first. When you have increased periods of sunlight, so typically that's why we see more blooms in the summertime, because you're having more sunlight for these plants to grow. You also have wind that's moving and stirring up our water. Salinity does affect this, as well as temperature. So it's hotter in the summer and they thrive in warmer waters. And also rain. And so rain relates to my next slide, which I'm going to touch on, is because rain mobilizes a lot of the nutrients or contaminants that are on the surfaces of our roads. You know, we fertilize our lawns, our gardens, we're washing cars and boats, our vehicles could be leaking stuff. And so when we get rain, it's all being mobilized now into our watershed, which is our ponds that are collecting all of this. And I'm just showing this graph right here, just so you can all see that this is the, this is also the average temperature, which is increasing over time. And the Northeast actually is the fastest warming region in the contiguous United States. And so it's heating up at a rate that's 50% faster than the global average, which is quite concerning, especially for us that live here. And so with this, we have rain, and with this increased temperature, we're going to be seeing more blooms. So aside from environmental factors, we also have anthropogenic factors, which are human-related factors. So as I talked about with the rain, it is mobilizing our nutrients that we have on our road. This is just a photograph that I actually took last year. We had some coastal flooding, and this gentleman this is over by Brant Point, is walking to his house. Unfortunately, couldn't get the person who was kayaking down to the beach. And so I'm laughing now, but it was quite concerning when you think about how everything is just all of a sudden now just moving around and going into our water bodies. And there's also a photo here that says, no dumping drains to our harbor because our stormwater is not treated. So anything that's going into the roads or anything that people are dumping out into the environment are going straight into our harbors and going straight into our ponds. And so fertilizer is a huge one. The town has, done a lot of effort to educate our landscapers and provide resources for them. And you have to test to see if you have phosphorus deficiency for you to apply phosphorus. So there's a lot of mitigating efforts that the town has done to reduce this, but it's still an issue. Wastewater for septic systems, are sources of nutrients because you're getting that high levels. And that's why sometimes you will see closures for the beach because of high fecal bacteria. Another big one is our development of the land. I will say if anyone's interested in the study, it's from the early 2000s, but still, it was explaining that a native grass strip that's about 10 feet wide captures 60% of sediment. So that's really great when you have like more of your like vegetative areas to minimize runoff. Also, native plants, if they're established properly, will remove up to 90% of unused nitrogen. And also tree roots, they're effective in removing groundwater nitrate pollutants. So the more undeveloped land we have, the better it is for our water. So the great thing about Nantucket, I believe we have like 40 or 50% of conservation land, which is wonderful. But the rest of that land, as you can see over time for all of you that have been here longer than I have, certainly, we are packing in as many houses into spaces that we can fit. And so unfortunately, that does have negative implications with runoff and sediment and, just having impervious surfaces for pollutants and contaminants just to run into the water, which also fuels cyanobacteria or harmful algal blooms. So some of the effects of HABs, I did touch on them briefly earlier. They are human health effects. They do produce toxins, and those toxins are not only for humans, they obviously affect animals. Dogs is a big one when they're around water bodies, and they're actually attracted to the scent and taste of them. Also, fish or birds and anything that's in the water that is ingesting these harmful algal blooms does have the potential to get, could be fatal or some severe illness. Environmental, it's odorous, it's unsightly. It does cause low dissolved oxygen, which I'll talk on. It can kill eelgrass. So we do have these blooms, obviously, in marine waters, even though we tend to, they're predominantly common in our freshwater and brackish, but it is a big issue also in marine waters as well. On Nantucket specifically, we have more of an issue for our ponds than we do in our harbors. But again, there's been years that we've had blooms. So as well, the last one is economy. Property values no one wants to buy a house that is located on a pond that is green, that is odorous, that has toxin producing. So you don't want your children playing in that area. So that decreases your property value. And we also have a big ecotourism out in Nantucket. Like, people come here because, at least one of the reasons why I love Nantucket, aside from many, is its natural beauty. And when you're getting these blooms and pond scum, and it's just, it's very unattractive and it's unsafe, and it does impact your recreation abilities. Even with people complaining when they're out on the boat, the aquatic vegetation is a lot, or it's just, they have a hard time breathing on some of the ponds. That has been complaints in the past when we've had blooms, as well as our fisheries. We have obviously a commercial and recreational fisheries out here. And so if we have a harmful algal bloom happening in our harbor, then there is no shellfishing, and that does affect Nantucket's economy. So going into a little more about the toxins that are produced with cyanobacteria. A lot of people think that by boiling your water, this isn't the case for Nantucket, but there are some places where people, their drinking water is one of the freshwater lakes. And then when you have these blooms, it is a serious issue for the community to get fresh water. And a lot of people think that when you boil the water that you're killing everything. That might be true for some bacteria. And although these are structurally bacteria, they're not really a true bacteria. So you're actually rupturing the cells, and that's how the toxins are released. So when the cell dies, toxins are released, and then they're in the water. So I recommend, if anyone, they're not drinking lake water on Nantucket, but for other communities that may watch this, it's don't boil your water. It is a serious issue. The EPA does have guidelines for drinking water standards, although they don't have official federal standards for recreation use of these ponds. And that's something that they're working on. They've been working on it for a long time, just as some of you or all of you may know how slowly the government works, but for specific reasons. So I can at least speak to that as myself, who is part of the EPA, that they are working hard to get these guidelines done. It's just having the resources and having the research behind it before they do these regulations. So to touch on some of the toxins, I briefly described the hepatotoxin, which affects your liver, and that is from Microsystems and cylindrospermopsin. These are all mouthful words, even for me. There's neurotoxins. That's one that is a big concern for a lot of people. It's a very dangerous one, and you could have, like it says here, paralysis of your skeletal and respiratory muscles within minutes. So it's a very dangerous one. Again, I will say it is very low quantities that we have had on Nantucket, and so I don't want people to come away from this talk being quite concerned and afraid to recreate on our ponds. Again, this is just letting you know that things, to be aware, just like when you go drive your car, there is a percentage that you could get into a car accident. That's the same with any water body. You can be swimming in the harbor, be swimming in the ponds. There's things that just happen, but I like people to have the information so they're aware of what might happen. Dermatoxins are typically what you would tend to see, at least on here, it's reactions to your skin. So I tell people, because a lot of people offer to or they come in with a sample because they're concerned. And I recommend people don't take samples, or if you do, you want to keep, it's great that we have masks now in a weird way that you can cover your mouth and nose for breathing, and then make sure you're wearing gloves because you will have a reaction to your skin. I myself have had my hands in the water when a bloom has been occurring for the toxin Microsystem Myself, I have not had a skin reaction, but there is the potential for that. And the last one, which I will talk about in a little bit, is the inhalation of toxins, which if any of you have read the Inky as of late, they did talk about blue-green algae and the ability for it to be in the air and for you to inhale it. Again, the research is in its infancy stages. There's not a lot of it out on there. They're working on it. And this is over long-term exposure and, you know, being in and out of blooms on a daily basis for a long time. So again, very little research on it. Just want to preface it with that. So some of the roots and effects of these exposures, like I touched on, it's dermal, it's usually acute. We have Lyngbia in our harbor. Sometimes you will see that on our eelgrass, if some of you are out there snorkeling or swimming or even scalloping. It is an issue because it's blanketing our eelgrass and can be cause for a decline of eelgrass as it's blocking out sunlight. That is, eelgrass needs to grow. And those of you may know that it's important for habitats for aquatic organisms. It helps water quality. It does. It stabilizes the soil. So it's great to have that there. And scallops in their early stages of life will attach them and hide from predators. So our scallop population actually depends upon eelgrass. Another common one is ingestion. Again, people are like, oh, I'm not drinking pond water, but sometimes you have children who are playing in the water, and because of their body size, they're impacted more. Same with dogs. So sometimes you will have you've heard of, or there's been news articles regarding dogs that have died within minutes of ingesting some harmful bacteria, the cyanobacteria, and people being like, it was fine. It took minutes. I don't know what happened, but it's the size and obviously their biology. But children are more affected than adults. So ingestion, and they're also touching hands to their mouth, and they're swimming and they're not cognizant of what they're doing with like their hands in their mouth. So you need to keep your eyes on your pets and your children when you are playing or recreating in our ponds. And what I wanted to talk about was the inhalation one, that's Pico Cyanobacteria. They're actually not bloom forming. So that is concerning for citizens because they can't see something. So if the pond looks fine, they're concerned about walking around the pond and if they're inhaling the toxins that are being produced, even though they don't see something. This one is a neurotoxin. It's linked to BMAA, which is a beta-methylalanine. Alanine. It's also linked with Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a popular nervous system disease, and it's a serious disease. So there is, again, preliminary research on this. It's still new, but they have come out with articles that has some supporting evidence behind these. So it's important to note and to use caution. So going on about environmental health. So we touched on human and animal health and now environmental health. Again, if you're having a bloom occurring in our ponds, you may see some fish kills. There has been some on Nantucket. You can just see them floating up on top of the water. If birds are then in turn eating those fish, then they have the option of getting sick as well. So that is, it's kind of a chain reaction when you have these blooms and if they're producing their toxins. As I talked about with the eelgrass, these blooms do affect eelgrass. It blocks out a light for aquatic vegetation, and also eventually they will die. So when these cyanobacteria die, they start to decompose, and then the bacteria in the water uses a lot of oxygen to decompose this. And so then you're getting these hypoxic or anoxic zones, which have low to no oxygen in the water. And a lot of aquatic organisms, although they're aquatic, need dissolved oxygen to survive. So you're getting the double whammy of the toxins killing a lot of the aquatic organisms, as well as just when they naturally die. Because even when you have an algal bloom that is not producing toxins, when they die, it takes a lot of oxygen out of the water to decompose, and then you're creating these zones that fish can't survive in or shellfish can't survive in. And for the last one, economic health. These are a couple of photos from Gibbs in Kapam Pond. That house is actually on hummock. Hummock does experience harmful algal blooms, not as intense or as often as Kapam and Gibbs, but it's still an issue. Again, I've had several individuals call me in regards to whether they should sell their home or whether they should purchase a home that's on a pond, and if they could tell me background about the water quality and algal blooms. So it is a concern for a lot of people, and I understand that concern for sure. It is impacting and can impact the fisheries, like I said before, for shellfish closures, or even just recreational use. If the pond has a sign up that says harmful algal bloom, you can enjoy your pond front property that you come on the summertime to get out there and kayak and have your children. And in ponds, a lot of people bring their children too, because it's safer for them to swim. It's not as intense as some of the South Shore beaches with waves. And so it's an issue. And again, like I said before, it does affect our ecotourism for all the reasons that I just said. So although I did talk a bit about toxicity and how important it is and how you should be aware of what you're getting into when you are recreating in these waters, I preface that with that there's still so much information to be learned about these. And there is a lot of money that is going into this. This is a worldwide issue all over the country. And there's a lot of research going on, but we still don't understand when toxins are expressed. So you could have, for instance, a Pseudonychia, which is a toxin producing species. And even though it has the capability of producing that toxin, it might not necessarily produce it. So that is the confusing part about these, is like when I do my cell counts, I'll take samples of different waters, I see different species and I count the toxin producing ones. And if they're at a certain level, then we just are on the conservative cautious side and we'll notify state, and then one of the ponds will be closed. That has not happened in the history of Nantucket. I will say I've asked a few people, we've had pond closures before due to bacteria, but to my knowledge, not for harmful algal blooms. So and at least the data that I've looked at from the beginning of our sampling back like 5, 6, 7, or I think about 10 years, our levels are low for the toxin producing species. So we don't even get close to the guidelines of where we could close these ponds. So that is a good thing, and I hope it stays that way. Also, visual blooms. It's great when you see one because I'm not, I'm going to put my dog on a leash. I'm not going to let my kids go in the water. But however, there are times when the water looks clear and there are still toxins in the water and that you don't know. There's also benthic algae that sometimes will break. Benthic is on the bottom, so they'll break off and float to the top, and dogs can ingest that. Kids could ingest that. So even though the water clarity looks good, their toxins could be still present. So there is a lot of research underway. The one that is, I think, picking up a lot of popularity because of how dangerous it can be and how much it's not known about it is the Pico Cyanobacteria, because, if you have low concentration and chronic exposure over time, it is linked to ALS and a lot of diseases and it does affect your nervous system, which is quite dangerous considering it is essentially a plant. So it's good to be aware of it. So that's a little bit about that. Some of the challenges when people are like, what do? I think my dog might have ingested some algae. I'm concerned, or even, your child, like you see signs or you read the newspaper, or you hear about algal blooms and you were just in Myacomet Pond playing or out kayaking. And so you're concerned. The issue that we get with this is that there's a lack of provider awareness. So doctors are actually unaware of the symptoms. Like if you come in and you're feeling dizzy or you feel lightheaded or nauseous, that could be due to a number of things, but it is important to let your doctor know if you did spend the day in a pond or if you were out in the water and all of a sudden you're just feeling sick, because the more information you give them, the more they can better diagnose this. Recently, last summer, there was a man in Chilmark Pond in Martha's Vineyard that made the newspaper. He was hospitalized because he was out there crabbing, and he was out there for several hours of the night and experienced like nausea, dizziness, was disorientated. So you can become hospitalized, and it's a real thing. And it was, in Martha's Vineyard, so not too far from us. So as I said before, the EPA does have guidelines for drinking water for at least 2 of the toxins. Again, there's so many toxins out there, so they're doing the best that they can, but they have 2 for the most popular ones. However, there's no federal standard for these cyanobacteria or cyanotoxins. But the World Health Organization has developed at least some recreation guidance on some of the toxins. So that's, if you want more information, you can go online. The EPA does have great information, as well as NOAA. So those are some resources. A lot of people are confused, and rightly so, between what is a HAB and what's not a HAB. And again, there's a disclaimer on this slide for a reason, because all algae blooms are different. But what I can say to help individuals out is, if something looks like spilled green paint, or is the pond just looks very, very green, I would just err on the side of caution and not recreate for that day. Blooms, depending, I've seen some come and go within a couple of hours, depending on wind. So that's a good thing that we live on an island and we're getting that sea breeze constantly. But blooms do tend to stick around. Sometimes they can be a couple days, sometimes it can be a couple of months. It's visible. And one test, which will be on the next slide, actually, I'll just jump to that. Oh, it didn't pop up. That's unfortunate. Oh, it did. Okay, great. Is a simple test if you wanted to do. Again, I recommend putting on gloves and keeping a mask on if you do want to do this. But typically the photo on the left, people are concerned it's a harmful algal bloom. That is an algal bloom. It's definitely an algal bloom, but it's not necessarily harmful. And that's a good way to figure that out, is just like, oh, you can use a stick or again, if your hands are covered in gloves, you can pick it up, and it's stringy, and sometimes it's called like mermaid hair or horse hair. I've heard that before too. Another easy one too is a jar test. You can collect a sample of it, and how you know it is cyanobacteria, because they're buoyant. So the photo on the right, or I think that's showing on the right on the screen, I don't know how it's orientated to the audience, but they will float to the top. So if you wait 30 minutes and if it sinks, it's fine. But if it's floating at the top, then that actually is a harmful algal bloom, cyanobacteria. So those are 2 kind of quick and easy ways. Again, it's not perfect. Doesn't mean that there's not toxins within, that filamentous algae that you see on the left. It's just, again, kind of a quick and dirty way to be like, discern between the 2. Nothing's perfect in ecology, but that's why I'm in the field. It always keeps me on my toes, keeps me excited and interested in the research. I won't go too deep into this, but if you wanted to see some of these cyanobacteria under the microscope, they're very interesting. I actually think they're very beautiful, even though they're so small and can cause wreak a lot of havoc on the economy, on human health, on animal health. It's just amazing what our environment is capable of doing and this earth. So this is a common one. I picked some of the common ones that we would typically tend to see in our ponds. This is Delico Sperm. It's filamentous and it's bead-like. It has heterocytes and aconites and gas vesicles, so it floats. There is a taste and odor to this. I myself have not tried that, and I don't recommend anyone else do that. But they have done research on it. So if you're out on the pond and it is just smelling bad, that could be an indication of that. And just a little biology lesson, if you wanted to, aconites are thick walled dormant cells. So you can see them on the slide. And a heterocyst actually functions to carry out nitrogen fixation. So they're very complex little organisms. So again, very impressive for what they actually can do in large quantities. A Phanezomenon, this is another one. It looks like grass clippings. So people can be confused by what's going on in the water. But if you do see this and it looks like grass clippings, that is a cyanobacteria. They also have a taste and odor, and in high temperatures and longer sun, it does promote blooms of these. And this is the most common one. That's what the EPA has guidelines for. It happens all over the world, is the Microsystems, which produces microcystin toxin. These are kind of hard to determine under the microscope as they look like other cells. But with a good eye and a good microscope, you can determine this pretty easily. So this is a big one that does have a lot of impact on our ponds. I did want to mention this one more time because this was featured in the INCI. The Land Council had purchased an air sampling device used to collect cyanotoxins along the shorelines of Kapam. And they did this back in 2019. And again, although it is expected to have aerosolized toxin in the air that was caught, I do want to preface it that only trace amounts were captured in the filters. So although the toxin that was caught, anatoxin A from these Pico Cyanobacteria, it was high in the water column, but very, very little in the air. But the interesting thing is, and really great for on Nantucket front, is this was the first time that it was caught, anatoxin A was caught in one of these air samplers. So that's great that a lot of our organizations on the island are really concerned about water quality, and especially the Land Council for getting one of these sampling devices, because the more information we have, that's how we can determine and have better management efforts for our pond use. So it's really great that we're doing a lot of good research across the island. So after all of this talk of toxins and just what can we actually do about it? So there are options out there. You can have flocculants, which bind to this that you can like remove out of the water. You have oxygenation, which will kind of, you're aerating the water, and so it's moving it around. We also have ultrasound or sonication. They have these devices that will put out sounds and break apart the cyanobacteria. Algicides are a big one. That's actually killing the cyanobacteria. It's a plant. And there's also dredging, which is pretty aggressive. It's quite expensive, but that actually takes the nutrients in the sediment that's promoting these blooms from happening. And there's also pond openings. I know that the town does do pond openings for Sacajah and Hummock Pond, and that helps at least flush the water. But a lot of these are maintenance. They're not solving the issue aside from dredging, but again, that has its other implications when you're dredging all of the bottom sediment and organisms that live in that, as well as vegetation. And it's also quite expensive. So as we close our talk, some of the things that we are doing on Nantucket, which is really great, is our harmful algal bloom monitoring program. So all of the organizations that you see are on this slide are involved, including Linda Loring, who just recently joined with their new edition of their property by Long Pond. And what we do is during the summer times, all of our organizations have different sites across the island, which they will monitor weekly. And so if we see a bloom occurring, then we will put up a red caution sign. Again, these are just visual inspections. Myself, I monitor the Great Pond, so Hummock, Long, Sacajah, and Maya Comet. I will go out and collect samples if I see a bloom occurring. And I will do cell counts. I know the Land Council and Conservation Foundation has done some toxin testing. So they will send out for toxins. So a lot of us are doing research and informing the public of what's going on. So if you ever see these signs, there is a QR code that you can scan on these signs, and it brings you to the website, the town website, that tells you a little bit more information about harmful algal blooms. And you can actually report your own bloom that you see occurring, which is really great because it helps notify us. So I will go out and sample if I get a survey, and I can do cell counts and at least know that we don't have a high amount of toxin producing species in the water, and people can recreate into it safely. So these are just some of our sampling areas. So we have all of the organizations kind of covering the wide span of ours, but if you look at all of our ponds on Nantucket, we have quite a bit. And some of them are larger than others, and some of them aren't as frequented by people, but it's still good to have eyes and ears out in the open. So that brings me to my next point. If anyone is interested in assisting with our monitoring program, because the more information we get and the more we can manage and better protect our citizens is great. We are focusing on the ponds again, because they tend to have the most impact. But if anyone is curious, I can leave my email address and or provide it to Sarah. Please email me. We just need people to help come out and just do visual inspections. This is not putting yourself in harm's way by collecting water samples or whatnot. It's just if you live by a pond or you happen to walk a pond area that we aren't covering at our sites, it's really helpful for us. And the Nantucket Biodiversity Organization, their subcommittee, the Nantucket Aquatics Threats, has a pond survey. It's a pond guide, and it's located at this website here. And it's a really great guide that kind of gives you everything about ponds, whether it be pond scum or algae or cyanobacteria. And it's great to review that. And then you are better equipped to kind of discern what is harmful and what is not. And they also have a pond survey, which is like the town survey, but a little more in depth. And that will get sent to this committee. And then again, we have an idea of what's going on in the ponds that we can't see. So if anyone is interested, it's not a large commitment. It would just be something weekly, or even if you couldn't do it weekly, bi-weekly, just getting eyes out on ponds that we all can't get to, because there's only a limited amount of us and our resources and time, and we do try our best to make sure that we're getting the island-wide spectrum and keeping people safe. So another thing that I always like to end on and include these in my slides is things in addition to helping us monitor for harmful algal blooms is we can reduce our nutrients and our inputs to our water. So I get a lot of the time people are like, oh, this is such a small thing, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing, or it doesn't really matter, like I'm the one person that's not upgrading my septic system, or I'm seasonal. Any little thing helps, because a lot of people will have that mentality, and that's when we have an issue with our water. So upgrading your septic systems if you can, or connecting to town sewer, always using a licensed landscaper, or just going with brown lawns. It's actually healthier for your lawn in the fall, and being okay with that. Or better yet, using native vegetation, because then you have to use less fertilizer, and it's accustomed to the climate here on the island. A big one is pick up pet waste as well. I see a lot of dogs on Nantucket. I mean, I love it, but I also recognize what it does to our water quality. I love dogs. But you know, you don't see where they're going to the bathroom. So if they're on a trail and they're in front of you, it's just good to be a good pet owner and pick up pet waste, or keep your dog on a leash, as well as it protects them, especially on the ponds, because at least then you know that they're not lapping up these harmful algal blooms that are on the shore. And then you can at least rest easy knowing that your dog wasn't in the water. Rain gardens are a great one. You can create them if you own a home. It helps filter out these nutrients and items that are going out into our street. And the last one is volunteer for local environmental groups. There are so many organizations on the island that we utilize volunteers, especially the town. I know we do for sure. And Adopt a Pond help us do our harmful algal bloom monitoring. It is really helpful, and it's a great way to get involved and get in the environment and know that you're doing something good. So I know I took most of the time. Hopefully we have a little bit for questions, but I actually borrowed this from a presentation that I saw, which I thought was cute. It says, a warning, lifeguard, bacteriologist, microbiologist, and toxicologist not on duty. So swim at your own risk. Just to end, it is kind of a risk that you take, but we like to put out information like this. And so I thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to talk on the Science Pub. I hope all of you enjoyed it and at least drank a beer while you watched.
Thank you so much, Thais. I really appreciate all the useful information, and also for the shout out. We're really excited at Linda Loring to be part of the Harmful Algal Bloom observation team. We're going to be monitoring at the north end of Long Pond, and I am happy to take questions. You can either put them in the Q&A or the chat. I'll monitor both. But while we're waiting for these first few questions, I had a few things that I wrote down. And if you're comfortable sharing, or if you have the data, how frequently do we have harmful algal blooms? Like in the summertime, and when the temperatures are warm and we're monitoring these, like how frequently does it happen across the island? Or are there certain areas where it happens more frequently?
Yeah, so I can only, for myself, speak to the 4 great ponds that the town monitors, which again is Long, Hummock, Sacajah, and Mayacamet. In my experience, Mayacamet and Hummock Pond experience quite a bit of blooms throughout the summertime, and also with our harmful algal bloom monitoring team, the other organizations that are monitoring those ponds also are showing me the same thing. So Mayacamet is a big one that experiences blooms, and Hummock, Kapam, and Gibbs, which the Land Council does monitor. That one, RJ, who is our water keeper on island, if all of you know who he is, he can speak more to that, but I know that pond, probably Gibbs at least, and Kapam probably stay green and throughout the summertime and sometimes into the fall. So that one's actually pretty visible. So if you ever go down there, you can, at least you can see, a good example of a harmful algal bloom that is ongoing. But again, I do say this is something that we do weekly. And it's again, based on our resources and what we're able to do. That's why if people come out and help us and adopt a pond, it's great because we get the whole island involved, and then we have a better idea and more data on what's going on in the other ponds that aren't visited.
Are there ponds that you have off the top of your head that need visitation, or is it more there's just, I know we have so many open water bodies that there's
We
plenty
do. Let's see. So these are the ones that we got, and this is actually maybe double than what we had the first year. So this officially, I guess, was started in 2019 when I came on board. A lot of organizations were doing their own kind of monitoring. But I figured let's work smarter, not harder. So let's team up. So we got everyone together, which was great. And this year, yeah, now we have you all, the Linda Loring, which is awesome. We have UMass Boston involved now, and Mass Audubon, which is great because they're already out there monitoring birds. And so it's useful. I think honestly, it's kind of, there are areas that we picked the hot spots, but obviously there's spots at, all of these ponds. And it's kind of like the individual, if you live near it, or if there's a favorite area, or if you want to go all the way up to Cascada and like check that out, because we don't have people going up there. It's useful for us. And even the harbor too. Sometimes it's easier to see these blooms because we happen to get them in the head of the harbor. At least in 2017, we had a bloom that wasn't necessarily toxic to humans, but harmful to shellfish. And that's where our oyster cages are. And so obviously that is an economic issue as well. So if people are out on boats and they see, you can visually see it, that's also helpful too. And so maybe, Sarah, I don't know if you can provide I think I can type in my email address, but at least to have that out so people can contact me if they do see something, because it's helpful.
And actually, that was what I was going to say was, I know that you were saying for the signs, like there's the QR code that can take you to the town website. Mm-hmm. But if there's additional ponds, as you said, that don't have signage, and then, someone's out by Jewel Pond, or, somewhere, I don't know if Jewel Pond is one of the monitored ones, but if there's some people out and it's not,
so we need that.
If they see something, then the best way would be to either email you or just like, that's the kind of first step, I guess.
Yeah. So again, this is a kind of a new streamlined program. So any comments or, just advice is appreciated. I'm putting up this slide right here because the Nantucket Aquatic Threat Committee, which is part of the NBI, has a great pond survey. So this is the one that we kind of are pointing our citizen scientists who want to come out and help to utilize, because it's more inclusive about, like, it's more in depth than the town kind of harmful algal bloom sign. So you can utilize both, but this on this link here, if you click on that link, it does bring you to a pond survey, and that you can fill out with a pond guide. So you'd have to go online to do that. So it's word of mouth. It's getting that out. Maybe hopefully over time we can get more signs around the island for people to utilize. But for right now, that's what we have.
Okay, I put your email in the chat because I could do that quickly, and I'm gonna find the pond survey link.
Thank you.
Directly, and I will put that in.
I think the link that I have on that web is directly to it, I believe.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat because I think people can copy that more easily.
Got it. Yeah.
Copy your.
Yeah, smart. Yeah.
I just put the pond survey in the chat as well. So, I am going to keep asking questions unless there's any from the audience, because I'm not loving this. It's hard to, love the subject when it is harmful algal blooms, but I'm appreciating this. And I also, as a dog owner, we don't have dogs at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, but when I walk my dog, a lot of times we go to pond areas, And I did run into someone one time who was warning me, this was years ago, where their dog got quite sick because the dog got a tennis ball that had gone into the pond. And so then the dog was like ingesting. And I know you talked a little bit about the human health concerns and how there aren't like great screenings with doctors for the effects of the cyanobacteria or the harmful algal bloom effect.
Unless you get blood work, but not everyone is going in there getting blood work.
Right. So how would we best to communicate with our vets, or is there a way to, I mean, I guess if you
I'm hoping that a lot of the vets on island are familiar with this. Maybe they're not, but I know how much everyone loves their dogs on this island, and dogs are just great in general. But I believe there are actually tests that you can do, but don't hold me to that. I want to say I have heard that. Sadly, I do not own a dog. If I did, I would know that. But there are tests you can do. I think I don't know how exact it is.
Yeah. I think if it's I think you're right that it's a common enough thing that many of the vets to be aware of it. I do have one more question, but then we have something from Sandra. She says, we live an eighth of a mile downwind of Maya Comet, and one of us has autoimmune hepatitis, additional risk. What are measures that we can take? So if you already live in that area and you're already at a secondary risk, are there?
So one, thank you for that question and being upfront and coming forth with that. I would say it's hard for me to say, oh, maybe you shouldn't recreate on the pond. The only thing I can say is that during the summertime, when you're getting those hot days, because again, these blooms happen with really warm temperatures, typically in the summer, I would avoid recreating in the pond. There are other ponds that you can use. Maya Comet is a beautiful one. I understand why people want to utilize it. I will be upfront in saying that Maya Comet has the largest watershed, and therefore it's getting it's more area for all of the contaminants and nutrients to go into that water. And so that pond has one of the, one of the worst water quality. It's not meeting its standards for the EPA. And so I would advise in the summertime, maybe to not recreate on the pond, just again, to be extra cautious. Again, I'm not a doctor, and the research is so limited on this, but again, if you are concerned about it and it might help ease some anxiety, I would just recreate on Sacajah or go to Long Pond. And again, they are capable of producing blooms, but Maya Comet has a lot of the characteristics of what cyanobacteria love. So.
And then she has a follow-up question about well water, and that's a good question. Do cyanobacteria or the harmful algal blooms, do they affect people's well water that are adjacent to these areas?
So that is a great question. And I need to do more research on that for myself. I think more of it is a concern for people who are using fresh lake water for their predominant like drinking systems. I'm not saying it couldn't be an issue, but I don't have that information offhand. But that's something I'm happy if you want to leave your contact information, and I can at least screen a lot of the research articles for information for you.
We do have to wrap up in a sec, but I just have one more question. I know in addition to the HAB monitoring signs that are in those specific areas, how else is the town educating about like the potential water quality issues in some of the ponds? You know, like we see people fishing in Maya Comet Pond, and I don't know if people, like if I fish in Maya Comet Pond, we're releasing. But I'm just curious about what else the town is doing about those issues.
Yeah. I think a huge one that we try to do is what we're doing right here, even though it's through Linda Loring Nature Foundation, is having events like this for education and outreach. Fish toxicity, There are some studies. The town has not performed any toxin tests on fish. I know the Land Council has done some preliminary work for mercury in fish. Mercury in fish, that's a long standing thing that has been going on for decades now. But we were looking in, I've had talks with the Land Council about posting signs. So they're in development of that through their organization, and the town is happy to facilitate some of that for them. We also have our website, which I need to get better about, or maybe you can help me too, Sarah, and this is just advertising that our water quality reports are actually online. And there's a whole section for water quality, whether it be the Wanna drinking water, the pond and harbor pond reports. I've written executive summaries that you can just click on. That's 2 pages instead of reading 60 pages worth of notes, so people can get a quick idea of like what's going on. And we actually have a new tool available, which I'm quite excited for. It hasn't been officially launched, but it is up on the website if people want to take a preliminary checkout of it. It is our water quality visualization tool. And so when you go on the website, you can click on the link and you can actually graph all of the data on different points that the town has sampled on for the past, since 2010. So past 11 years. So again, it hasn't been officially launched, but it is up on the website if people want to check it out. And you can see the pond water quality data and harbor and the harbors. So really cool tool.
So I just looked at it with the sneak peek because so the link I just put in the chat is to the town's water quality page. And then on that page, there are multiple boxes, and one of the boxes links to the water quality reports that Thaïs was just mentioning, or the water reports rather, but then the visualization and water quality tool is also there. There's information about the harmful algal blooms. So that's like another direct link, stormwater, public water supply, etc. So that's kind of like the website that I just put there is the go-to for all your water quality needs.
Yeah, so a lot of information, and we'll explain it a little bit later on when it gets officially launched, but
okay, great. Well, I want to thank you so much, Thaïs, for coming today, and thank you for putting all those resources together in one spot. You know, like today we were focusing on harmful algal blooms, but then of course it leads to other questions about water quality and well water and drinking water and things. So the town website on water quality is a great resource, and so thank you for putting that all together for us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great and perfect timing as we start up our monitoring in June. Yeah. So this is a great time to have a talk about tiny toxins. So
great.
Everyone be safe out there, and thank you for joining.
Great, thank you again. And I just want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. And so if you have friends that you want to share this with, or neighbors that you're interested in like letting them know about this, this will be up on the Linda Loring Nature Foundation website in the coming days, and we will share links around on our various social media platforms. So keep an eye out, and you're welcome to share it with those, even those that weren't registered today, you can share it around. So thanks again, everybody, and we hope everyone has a great season.